So, welcome everybody to our food waste panel on hidden solutions. We've got an amazing panel of experts, super excited for you to hear everything they're going to talk about. Wanted to just do a little housekeeping first. As always, please silence your phone. There will be an audience Q&A at the end. If you want to ask a question, just please use the microphones. They will be floating about. And then the session will be recorded. So it'll be available on ReFed's website shortly after the event. All right, let's dig in. Hello. Thank you all so much for being here. This is just hearing what you've already been talking about, going to be super interesting, super insightful, but wanted to start by asking each of you to go around, say who you are, say what you do, how you're connected to this topic.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Cacciola. I'm the Global Sustainability Lead on the food team at Google. Those of you in the audience may know what the Google food team does. Oftentimes I get the question of like, Google does food now too? So we are the team that oversees the food program. The food program at Google consists of about 400 cafes, 1,500 micro kitchens, which for those of you who went on the tour yesterday, you got to experience the micro kitchen snacks and beverages, coffee bars, food trucks, et cetera, all for Googlers, Google employees, and guests. So that's the Google food program. Great to be here.
Hi, I'm Gabrielle Tiven. I'm a senior partner at LID, which is a supply chain management consulting firm. And as a company, we work with companies across the US and Canada designing warehouses, all of the equipment and technology inside big distribution centers. I work a lot with food banks in both the US and Canada on their facility design, and also do research in food waste. And I'm working right now with my team on a big project with ReFed to revise the numbers in the insights engine for manufacturing and distribution.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Lorenzo Macaluso from CET. We're about a 50-year-old nonprofit organization that helps people and businesses save energy and reduce waste. So we have a whole energy arm that I won't get into, but we do like to try to pair those together. And in the food waste space, we've been working on that for over 25 years now, and we think of ourselves as sort of a concierge consulting service to help food businesses identify opportunities across the wasted food scale that make the most sense for them, and then hold their hand through the process of implementing hopefully solutions at all of the levels, because usually there's the most benefit there, and guiding their way through that. We do that mostly in states that have food waste bans. We'll probably talk a little bit about some of that. And we're really excited about some expansion we're doing with a lot of support from from ReFed and from Toast.
Excellent. Great. So to kick it off, we'll just do a question for the group and answer as you want. Follow each other. This is going to be very conversational. So what are some of the most overlooked but really highly effective practices that you've seen in your work, and why do you think they remain underutilized still?
Anybody? I'll start. All right.
Kathy.
So just for a little bit of context too, at Google, we have a public goal around reducing food waste by 50% per Googler by the end of 2025 and sending zero food waste to landfill. We announced those goals back in 2022. Big shout out to my colleague Aimee Rawlins, who's in the audience, who was a big part of getting those goals started at Google. And our history of working on food waste reduction predates even that, but having a public commitment, as many people know, really helps to sort of amplify and drive impact across the organization. So we've been measuring and managing food waste mainly in partnership with LeanPath, who's also in the room, shout out to LeanPath, in driving that impact. So a couple of the sort of like subtle but successful interventions that we've seen are very candidly basic things like planning your purchases, planning your production, being mindful of how much food is being put out on the line where Googlers are potentially serving themselves, so that we know that that food will likely get eaten. Once we put food out on the line, then that food can no longer be either repurposed or donated. So those are a couple of interventions that we use, and by we, I mean our food service partners like Guggenheimer and Compass and others who are in the room as well.
I guess I would also echo what Kathy said about back to basics kinds of things. Like in a distribution context, I'm thinking about refrigeration. Like if you have a good cold chain, that's going to extend the shelf life of the food. And another would be production planning in a manufacturing context, and using, as good software as you can to align supply and demand and figure out how to make the right things in the right places. Sometimes I feel like when we talk about that in a food waste context, people are like, that's so boring. Like, of course everyone has a supply, like has a cold chain. Like, what, you're not saying anything new, that's not very interesting. And I'm like, actually, if you look at operations and facilities across North America, you'd see a wide range of skill, sophistication, infrastructure. Some people are doing it very well, but there's plenty of people that are not doing those things very well, and there's a lot of room for improvement there. So that's like some pretty common, basic building blocks of supply chains that could be better.
I'd say one of the simplest things is echoing some of the comments we heard even this morning of do something. I think when we're engaging with businesses, even though they are in the food business, or maybe you're a college or university and have a large food service, or whatever it may be, your primary focus is not reducing food waste, right? You're in the business of whatever it is that you do. And so this often feels like extra. So our approach is often, what's the thing that you can most easily say yes to, and start doing it. And then that's sort of like the gateway drug into the rest of the food scale, wherever you have entered it. And it does tend to really make it a lot easier to realize the next step. Well, if you start with composting, wow, I'm paying for this to buy it, and then I'm paying to compost it. Why am I doing this in the first place? Maybe I should be donating. Maybe I should be preventing. Something to trigger that light bulb that there's more that we could be doing. So it sounds so simple and so basic, but just do something is the start to the process, and it really tends to open the door to a lot more opportunities.
Can I pick up on that too? So, Lorenzo, to your point around like it sometimes feels like extra, I think it's interesting because I find that if we lead with the framing of reducing food waste for the sake of the planet or the sort of like good of humanity, it feels candidly like too far from the business and the operations and the practical day-to-day. And at the end of the day, we're literally talking about operational efficiency. We're talking about just financial management and operational efficiency, and using that lens and that narrative really resonates more from a business and operational perspective. And then you can layer on the additional, like for those who are more in like the heartstrings pull, then you layer on, and this is good for the planet, and this is good for people. But I find that the operational efficiency language also is really, really important.
Yeah, I want to keep going. It's just that in the, like I'm thinking in a distribution center kind of context, companies, they are making investments in things that can help food waste, like better refrigeration or inventory planning software, inventory control software or planning software, but they're not always talking about food waste. They're talking about increasing capacity, improving productivity, lowering total amount of inventory on their balance sheets and like that. And then if you can bring the food waste conversation in, it's sort of like a cherry on top. It's adding to it and making a stronger case to make that investment, but it's usually not the leading reason.
Really, no, that's great. So I want to, Gabrielle, pivot on something that you said, but you all might have thoughts on this. So, small scale organizations, nonprofits, they have limited capacity, they have limited funding. So even some of these things that are seemingly small can still take a lot of resources. Do you have, if you were giving advice to someone with just limited capacity, is there a place you'd start in terms of implementing some of these, or what would be the advice that you would give? It's too early. It's too early for that.
I mean, I would. One thing I've seen a little bit of, and I would love to see more, is more of the private sector actually providing the logistics instead of the nonprofit. So I see this context where the grocery store chain will say, like, you can have the food, but you have to come get it. Why are they not putting their own kind of trucks and warehousing capacity in the game? And we do see some of that. There's an example of a food service distributor in California who does a lot of like reverse logistics, and they'll pick up the food from their clients are restaurants, and then they'll pick up the excess food. It's their trucks, it's their warehousing. But I was speaking to this woman who runs this program, and she said, we have not found a lot of copycats. Like, others are not doing it. So maybe if there's a way to inspire the private sector in some way. I know that's vague, but try to get them to do more.
We actually, in our Bay Area campus, and Rachel from the Compass team knows more about this than I do, but high level, we partner with our regional produce supplier. They drop off, and then in their essentially reverse logistics, they're picking up viable food for donation and providing it to those in need.
I'll just piggyback on that. That I think that in the Northeast states, at least, where a lot of our work is happening, we are seeing more sort of private partnerships and even willingness to pay for like that donation service to some degree, so that they're getting the quality of data that they need for tracking and for tax purposes, and also recognizing that this is a service, and if they need that, if they're looking for that professionalized service, that there's a cost to that, and there are a lot of really cool collection models happening that, especially for perishables and prepared foods, those are not likely to go back through like the food banking system because there's too many steps, not enough quantity of the same materials. So there's a lot of like direct to food pantry to distribution center models that are popping up, and they do need the support to succeed, and we're seeing a lot of that develop in some states.
Yeah, that's great. Kathy, going to jump to you. You talked about planning and how important that is, which I love because it's true for consumers too. You know, doing better meal planning, doing better just like thinking ahead, but also obviously true at a big scale with a company like Google. Can you talk a little bit about some of the like nitty-gritty changes that you've made? I know when we talked before, there were just some really interesting tweaks to your systems that had actually resulted in like huge changes on the ground.
Absolutely. So in addition to the fundamentals of planning your purchases and your production, we do other things like towards the end of service on our buffet line, we might not put out the full set of items, but instead do like a pre-plated or plated to order, which also gives a sort of like higher quality of experience for the guests and the Googlers. I mean, when you're served by a chef and they've like thoughtfully put something on a plate for you, it's a nice experience. In our offices in Europe and EMEA specifically, we did a test actually around pre-plated items towards the end of service, and found that we reduced overproduction. I think the number was by like 57%. We did increase plate waste by a small percentage, about 4% or so, but that's a small bump in plate waste relative to the amount of overproduction waste that we've been able to drive. So for myself, like I don't eat cucumbers. So if somebody put cucumbers on, I'm like, that's going to be my tablespoon of plate waste. But that's one, I think, really tangible example.
Yeah, that's really cool. I loved hearing about just those like on the ground changes that you don't even think about.
I think that makes me think of a similar story. One restaurant in Boston that we helped, they're called Sauce, and they're known for their French fries. They have like awesome fries. It's kind of their thing. And we were helping them, and they were already doing quite a few strategies, particularly composting. Again, this was one of those like, okay, well, we think we're addressing our food waste. But we realized how much of their compost was potato peels. They were peeling and peeling and peeling and peeling. And so we suggested, why don't you leave the peels on? Try it. And so they did it like as a little pilot, made sure that their customers were still going to be okay with it. And so like that's moving up the scale, right? And not producing the waste in the first place. They were able to eliminate some costs on the compost collection service. They had these awesome fries that their customers really liked. So just...
They saved labor, presumably. Because they saved labor because they didn't have to peel all
and
these
they,
potatoes.
And they saved labor, right? So like win, 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 and reducing food waste, but like simple, not complicated, not new technology, but just a change in practice that made a big impact.
Earlier today and during our planning call too, we were just talking about thoughtfulness and sort of like the pause and thoughtfulness and just pausing and thinking about how we could do things differently. And I think that's a great example of the illustration of like how things have always been done versus how they could be done, and then the additional benefits with the new process.
Totally. And Lorenzo, you mentioned technology, which I think is a good opportunity to talk briefly about AI. And, you know, we've heard this morning how that's being used really effectively in Washington State for some solutions there. But, you know, as we know, there's a lot of issues that come with that too. So how do you all see AI and, you know, advanced technology, those kinds of solutions that are often, you know, pitched hard and get a lot of money, sort of playing nicely with some of these just, you know, theoretically boring but really, really useful solutions?
from not Google go first on AI. I'm going to break the mold. I'll have a point of view, but I'm going to let somebody else.
I would like. I don't know if AI is the secret sauce in these things, but there's definitely advanced software that can help things. I'm thinking in a context of advanced planning software for a production environment, like a manufacturing production environment. I don't want to get. I'm not sure I can do justice to the technical details of like whether AI is relevant or not. I mean, it surely is. But what is interesting is that the newer technology is able to plan much faster and to kind of run multiple scenarios and respond to real-time data. So you can move away from what was a kind of waterfall cascading, where you have to do like a demand plan and a production plan and an inventory plan, and then when something doesn't go as you planned, which is all the time, then you have to go back and run the cycle again. And if you can speed that up, you can get much better at responding to changes. That's like some of the newer software that we see being implemented and is able to reduce inventory across a network, which then can reduce waste because there's less of a chance that food goes bad while it's sitting there, either from expiration or from damages. And so that is effective. I'm sure the software companies, the companies that make that software are going to add AI, features to it. But
I'll say that I think of the technology as the tool. It's not the thing, because a person still has to do something different. I know Andrew is here from Lean Path, and I love Lean Path, and we promote all those tools a lot. And I think that the important thing about them is it gives the data. It gives the information from a management perspective of what's happening, where should I focus, what's the real impact that I could have by making this decision or that decision. But especially as you get like further down the scale, if you will, composting is always the example that I use. It still comes down to a person in the kitchen putting the carrot top here and not here. And so like that training and that personnel management cannot be overlooked. And I think when you compare the technology tool that gives you the measurement and like shows the improvement over time, paired with good solid management, that's when the secret sauce really starts to happen. So it's both. I think it is most powerful when you can use them together.
So we often joke in meetings at Google of like, how long did it take for AI to get mentioned, or how many times? So I think, Emily, we made it like 15 minutes into this conversation for AI to come up, which is also why I didn't want to answer first. But so I'll just give like two very practical applications, one that's specific to food waste and one that's not, because I feel like we talk about AI, and a lot of people I see seem overwhelmed by like, I don't know even how to use it or what it is and how I could use the tools in my context. So picking up, Lorenzo, on one of the things you were saying with our use of Lean Path across the majority of our offices, we've recently rolled out one of the new features that automatically looks at the picture of the food that's being weighed and tracked, and it prompts what likely that food item is from top 5 items. So we're sort of speeding up the time that it takes for individuals to track food waste. They still need to take the action of taking that food waste, putting it on the scale, et cetera, but it speeds up the time a bit, and then ideally gleans better insights because we're minimizing potential user error in the processing piece. The other piece that I'd offer just as like an individual is one of the greatest tools that I use is Notebook LM, which is super helpful, and now I'm like an advertisement for Google. But if you have not used AI and you don't know where to start, I would recommend Notebook LM. You can upload large PDFs and have it do a summary. We did a project recently where we updated our procurement standards across our global operations, and then I got to the point in the project where I needed to write the FAQs and the key messages doc, and I was like, oh shit. Okay, you know what? I'm just going to upload all my docs to Notebook LM and ask it to draft the key messages and the frequently asked questions, and it gave me the first version like that, and I had a 60% version done, and then I could just sort of edit it from there. So just as individuals, I would encourage everybody just to like play around with the tools and figure out how to use them in your context.
That's great. And so now we're going to pivot away from tech, which both of you kind of mentioned a bit, and go to people, which are really at the heart of these changes. You have to get buy-in, whether it's leadership, whether it's people on the ground, and that can be tricky. So how have you guys seen, effective ways of encouraging behavioral changes, of getting buy-in at every level? Yeah, would love to just hear if there's examples or, in your own work or elsewhere.
Sure. I mentioned that my team is doing this project for Refed on the numbers for manufacturing and distribution. And so we've been interviewing a lot of manufacturers and distributors as part of this project. And a number of them mention just a human focus. Like, this is an important, we make this an important issue in our company, and that's one of the ways that we drive waste down. One distributor talked about putting waste as part of the incentive pay metrics in their warehouse wage structure. And so the employee, then they said, well, the employees were like driving the forklifts more carefully to not run into things. And also they were paying more attention on the receiving side and checking things more carefully because they didn't want to bring in things that didn't meet temperature requirements or expiration date requirements, because then later they were going to get dinged for those things in their incentive pay. So it had caused the staff to be more careful, and he felt that was a good impact.
I think that one thing that I was thinking about there is when we go in and are starting an engagement with a business, it's listening first and understanding where their motivations are, their pinch points. I mean, we're a mission-driven organization, and climate is our sort of driver behind this work, but it's not everybody's, and so listening is really, really important, and particularly in like catering and restaurants, like those kinds of sectors. People are in the food business because they love food and they care about it, and intuitively they know like they don't want to waste food, and so some of that is just giving the space to talk about that, and so many times whether it's the chef, the frontline person, whoever it is, has an idea, and so much of our approach is just allowing for the space. Like, again, this is not their priority, but it's ours, and facilitating that space to be able to talk about it. And while we have like lots of ideas and we've seen successful approaches in many, many different types of businesses, we're not in your kitchen, so you probably have an idea, and that becomes baked into our recommendations, or encourages them to follow on with those kinds of ideas so that those new ideas can be incorporated into operations. That's, I think, really, really important to empower those people to do that.
I love the example of financial incentives. I mean, I feel like the financial incentive is like the clearest way to drive performance, for better or worse. In addition, though, things like culture, operational expectations, accountability, just making it part of how the business runs. Again, this comes back to what we were talking about earlier. I think like if something is perceived as like, oh, we're working on these food waste goals because Kathy said so, and because we've got these public goals, like that doesn't drive or motivate anybody. But if our head chef and the operations team is like, this is important, we care about this. Also, we're working in service of our client, so let's be responsible in how we're managing our food budget and not wasting food. Like all of those things are the actual drivers that improve performance and reduce waste.
I'll pick up on one thing. Since you're talking cost, super, super important. And one of the things that we've baked into the model, we have an engineer on staff, and she created just a simple spreadsheet tool, and we call it trash math. And it just like, what are the inputs, has some basic assumptions about food cost and disposal costs, and runs through scenarios of, what are you paying right now for trash, and how much of we also have a sort of an estimator tool that how much food waste might your location based on your sector and other metrics that we gather. And then that feeds into, okay, what's the cost impact of composting, what's the cost impact of donation, of prevention, and gives that relative estimate of what's your ROI going to look like if you invest time, effort, energy into any one of those scenarios. And when you can combine the cost piece, because the bottom line matters everywhere, with that like motivation and heartstrings, then you're really hitting on it.
Well, those of you who are on the tour yesterday already saw this, but I think it was a great example that, again, Rachel from Compass, who's in the room, talked about yesterday. So the illustration was towards the end of service, say we have 3 wells with salad bar offerings, we'll minimize that down to 1 well with a smaller set of pans and dishes, still the same offering. So you still have like your 14 different toppings. We're just not displaying a pound worth of that item. We're just being like a quarter pound worth of that item, or whatever the case may be. And Rachel, I really appreciated yesterday your point too around the how there's maybe like 5 minutes more of time on the operator's end at the end of service of sort of shifting the offering there. However, there's also less time up front in production because we're not overproducing food that's going to be put out, that's not going to be eaten, and then needs to be disposed of. So there's sort of like hidden savings in the system with some of these subtle but successful solutions. Did I just hop on our topic? I did.
Well done.
Nice call out. Yeah, that's great. So Lorenzo, I want to pop in to ask about a program that you recently launched with the support of Refed. It's about training participants to be better at food waste reduction. So can you talk a little bit about the program, what you've seen so far, who the participants are?
Sure. So we were really fortunate to be a recipient of one of the Catalytic Grant funds, and our project is to sort of take the kinds of things that I've been talking about here, this one-on-one assistance of helping navigate customers through their path that we've spent kind of decades figuring out and deploying mostly in the Northeast states where there are food waste laws and we're the sort of no-cost compliance assistance arm for a lot of the regulatory agencies. But taking that knowledge and giving it to other like organizations around the country so that they can deploy it, because this is all happening like necessarily locally. And so we've developed sort of a training package that has a virtual portion and then an on-site portion. We were hoping that we might get 10 or 20 organizations around the country to maybe be interested in this. And we were totally blown away that when we put this call out in the late fall, over 70 organizations around the country raised their hand and said, we want to get that training. And we didn't have the capacity to take that many people, so we had to go through a whole process of how do we get everybody through. And actually today we're starting the round 2 of the in-person training. So in Gresham, Oregon is one of the communities. We're doing a combo of Wisconsin of Madison and Milwaukee, and I'm going to draw the blank on the name of this California Council of Governments. Somewhere in Southern California, it'll come to me. San Gabriel. They're doing the on-site. So we're working to try to scale our impact by just empowering others to have the knowledge, the tools, that trash math. The other major thing that we do is we do a landscape analysis. So everybody that participated had to do a homework project from the virtual session of who are all of your providers? Who are the composters, the anaerobic digestion, the animal feed, the donation, all of that? What are all the possibilities? And even the participants who really thought they knew what was going on in their area, it was one of the best feedback that just figuring that out and the act of writing it all down and gathering that information was really eye-opening that there's often more that you think is going on, and that becomes the basis, the tool for being able to guide food businesses to the solution that makes the most sense for them. Because none of this doesn't it's not like cardboard. Cardboard can be shipped anywhere around the world to get recycled. Food waste is not going to go that far. So you got to know it's locally available.
There it is. The local piece is so important, and I think, obviously ties into what Dana was talking about this morning, just with scale and the challenges there. And kind of along those lines, would love to hear from all of you on, the cross-sector collaboration. What's working? Gabrielle, I loved what you said about that corporations could play a bigger role there. Are there other ways that this isn't, maybe successes or also pain points that still between the various actors in this that are just they're not solved yet?
I'll give another back to basics example, which is just frequency of pickups. We still see in manufacturing distribution facilities that there is food to donate, but the food rescue or food bank does not come frequently enough to get, they'll come once a week or twice a week, and that's not enough. So just coming more often.
I mean, I feel like for us, collaboration is just part and parcel of how we function as a business, because our food service program, as you've heard me allude to, is managed in partnership with food service vendors like Compass, Sodexo, Kuchenheimer, and a long tail of others. So we are in weekly meetings together talking about exactly some of the examples that I've shared here and sharing those between food service companies in service of driving performance improvements across not only the Google Food Program portfolio, but even amplifying that more broadly.
And how easy or not easy was it for Google to scale? I mean, obviously it's a massive organization with entities across the world. Like, how has that been, scaling it up at all sites and with different leadership and buy-in and stuff? How's that been for you?
I think the fact that we had the foundation of already doing this work as part of the business gave us that solid foundation to build upon. So we were sort of like amplifying and driving performance even more. And I think having a public goal, well, for context too, I used to work at Aramark leading sustainability. And I was in public affairs, corporate comms, and investor relations. So I was often dealing with the external pressures or opportunities to drive internal performance. And I think there is a real case for having public goals to help drive progress and accelerate that even further. So that was a big piece for us in sort of like moving the needle even further.
Yeah, totally. So I want to move on to, last year there was a big study that came out about food waste in a number of states, and the kind of top line of the study, and that got picked up by a lot of media, was that food waste bans have largely failed except in Massachusetts. I know we've kind of talked about that a little bit. Lorenzo, you've got some good info there, but it turns out that was maybe not the whole truth. So maybe you can give like a brief overview of what it found and then talk about some of the limitations there. And Gabrielle, I know you're well informed on that too, so we can just hop in as needed.
Sure. I mean, being from Massachusetts and working on this, top level, I'll agree with that, selfishly. But I do think it missed a lot. It talked about enforcement as one of the main things, and Massachusetts does have a unique enforcement model where it happens at the site of disposal rather than at the point of generation, and they're able to see sort of a lot and larger volumes of material. So all of that's true, but then I think the time period that they looked at was not long enough to really take into account the different models of the policies. And the other thing that this study really surprisingly didn't dig in on was like the level of investment that Massachusetts made ahead of the ban. It's not like the policy flipped the switch and all of a sudden everything was happening. Well, they were investing in infrastructure, in awareness raising. They established the program that we run under contract to them called the Recycling Works program. That's this compliance assistance program where we're literally helping thousands of businesses every year. Like, that combination of factors is really actually what's making Massachusetts, rise. I think the other thing that by not having it look at a long enough time horizon, many of the other states that have these types of policies have like a radius model where you're subject to the ban if you're within 20 or 30 miles of a facility, a composting or anaerobic digestion facility. And those are there to help spur infrastructure development, right? They're lack the infrastructure, so it takes the time for the infrastructure to come online to then be able to access it. So that felt like a miss as well, and like sort of a premature judgment that those other policies weren't as effective because they just need the time to have more facilities come online. And we are starting to see that now in a number of states that we're doing work. New York has got a lot more facilities coming online, Connecticut, and really across the board. So it just didn't go deep enough, I guess, is my short story.
So there's still hope.
Indeed. And I think it's very important. I mean, Dana mentioned it this morning, like there's now, I think she said, a dozen states. It is, from our perspective, like policy is super important to like set the tone, have a level playing field for the marketplace, directionally help. But by itself, it's not going to suddenly just change everything. It takes private sector investment. It takes all these other inputs for the goal of the policy to actually come to life.
On that theme of hope, I was actually, as we were convening this morning after the morning session, we were just talking and debriefing a little bit. I found this morning session really hopeful. And some of the bright spots from the EPA and USDA and where there is work still happening, I think is something to be celebrated and acknowledged.
Definitely, yes. I'll save my federal funding cuts question for later. So I know we've talked a bit, Kathy, about Google obviously has a huge footprint, but Google, other large companies, what kind of impacts can they have on, municipal infrastructure, policy changes? How does, building rules, has Google participated in that, or have you seen that with some of your partners, just in terms of throwing your weight around to change for the better?
Funny with throwing your weight around. I used to get that at Aramark too, where people are like, "You're Aramark, you can drive, the change." Google has power, but not always as much power as people think, especially within the food program specifically. So just for context too, the food program is part of the Real Estate Workplace Services team. We call it RUSE. And within the RUSE team, we have a broader sustainability group. So some of you may know Stefan Modritzer, who's my colleague in RUSE Sustainability and leads circularity. And Stefan's also been a key partner on a lot of this work around food waste reduction, and particularly on driving towards our diversion goal. So in Stefan's role, he works most closely with our workplace services managers who work with our facilities team. So we've got food service vendor partners that you've heard me talk about, and then on the facility side, we have other teams like JLL who help manage some of our building services. So there's a lot of partnership and collaboration on that side, just within the Google ecosystem, let alone with municipalities and haulers. But we've been focusing a lot, looking globally at sort of our data overall when it comes to diversion. Our biggest area of opportunity is particularly in Asia Pacific, so that's really where we've been leaning in with other partners in our sustainability team in Asia Pacific to identify different haulers and municipalities and where we can drive performance improvements that not only support our organization, but amplify impact more broadly.
That's great. And Gabrielle and Lorenzo, I don't know if either of you have thoughts on, clients you've worked with, your own companies, kind of partnering with local municipalities to change laws, push policy changes. It's fine if not. Yeah. It only goes downhill from here, so come on, guys. Hopeful.
No, I will say that as these states that have enacted these food waste bans, one of the things that many of them have done is reach out to the various association groups, the restaurant association group or the food associations like the supermarket industry groups, and at least in a number of the states where we've done work, there's been surprisingly little pushback for this kind of a regulation. Many of the regulated entities already are doing something and didn't object to this. And so that also goes a long way, and I think has been a strategy so that some of the states that have implemented this was very smart of them to, well in advance of proposing the actual regulatory or legal changes, engaging those associations, getting their feedback. The state of New York did, I think, a really good job on this. There was a few rounds of attempts at their law, and there was a lot of stakeholder engagement to get feedback. What's the right size of the radius? What's the right tonnage threshold that's practically achievable, so that when this had to go through the legislative approval process, it had a much smoother path when the lobbyists weren't screaming and saying no, and the lobbyists were saying, all right, fine. That makes it a lot easier to get the policy passed.
Totally, great. Okay, so now we'll do one question on negative. So as Dana mentioned this morning, while food waste programs aren't seeing a ton of hits, a lot of ancillary programs are, and that includes a Rhode Island food waste reduction program that I know that CET has been a big part of. So we'd love to just hear a little bit about the program, what's on the chopping block, and maybe if there's things that there or elsewhere, other avenues to pursue. We can flip this back to a positive too. What do we have to keep us going there?
Sure. Yeah, the program that Dana mentioned, the $18 million that the Rhode Island Food Policy Council secured, that was one of the programs that got stopped. We'll see how that plays out with the various efforts to reverse that decision. and we were part of that project to do the kind of role that I've been explaining here for Rhode Island. So that's unfortunate. It was so cool that it was that large of a investment of a federal grant. I think it's probably one of the largest ever, and it was the only food waste only project under that sort of funding mechanism, which was also sort of a bummer for that one to be cut. But I think that one of the things that we're seeing is that there are so many other drivers and sort of funding mechanisms and programs going on, particularly at the state level. There's so many states now that are working on this and finding ways to invest. I think at the municipal level is another big one. Many cities have zero waste plans now or climate action plans, and we're really excited to see that food waste is getting like the climate attention that it deserves. I mean, we do a lot of energy work, and we're psyched about that too. And when we can pair energy and waste work, that's even better. But there are all those different avenues and different motivators. And honestly, we've been doing this work since well before there were these policies. We had heard a lot of here about like the business case, right? So like lean in on the business case of this just makes sense. You just have to pay attention to it and find the avenues. So bummed out about what's happened, but also there's a lot to still do. I'm trying to give myself
good job. So we're going to turn to audience questions really soon, but wanted to just one final question for everyone in the audience who is, I'm assuming, loving all of these ideas. But if you could give people one piece of advice, what is one solution, to scale up, or one thing people haven't thought about, something that's been successful in your work. Do you have one place to start?
Gosh, I definitely
it's so annoying. I'm so bad at answering these types of things.
I definitely don't have one. Sorry. I mean, my one theme is, Andrew Shackman and I talk about this often, is like the hard part is doing the easy stuff. Everyone, everywhere, every day. And the analogy I like to use is like dental flossing. Who dental flosses every single day? Not everybody. How easy is it? Pretty damn easy. So like it's just pausing, doing those easy things, but getting everybody to do them everywhere, every day. So thanks for the clap.
Yeah, I'll say the same in a warehousing context, like good storage equipment where everything has a place to go, so your stuff is not in the middle of the aisle and then gets hit and then damaged, or you have good slotting so all the items are in the right place, and when you go to pick your building pallets with the heavy cases on the bottom and the light cases on the top so you don't crush things. These are total warehouse basics. But we still see operations in my work all the time that don't do them that well. So just fixing those things.
Well, I guess I should just keep going on that theme because I didn't know what I was going to say, but I think it's so right that a couple different sectors represented here. We've done work in just about every food sector, and it's the same across the board. That like whatever your best practices are in your sector, right? It's easy to write an SOP. It's all of those things, but then you've got to actually do it, and it has to be managed. It is the everyday, and this is when we think about like. I compare this a lot to energy efficiency. If you weatherize your building or if you change your heating system, that's done, right? They're like you're not going to unweatherize it. There's nothing that you're going to do differently that's going to make the weatherization go away. But with working with wasted food, somebody still has to do something, the right thing, each and every day. So it's a culture thing that has to happen within the organization to value it, to measure it, to manage it. Whatever strategy you're deploying. So I think it is every little thing every day. Nice job, Andrew, wherever you are. That's okay.
That's perfect. Thank you all. That was great. Okay, so now we're going to open it up to questions, and I think we're going to have a mic floating around. She's going to borrow mine. Yes. Okay, so if you have a question, wave Angel down, and she will come to you.
Thank you very much. I'm Anne Bordier from World Resources Institute. Very interested in your last comment, actually. So, because we always talk about low-hanging fruit with businesses, and there's a bit of an assumption that we have now reap those low-hanging fruit, but listening to you, I get the impression actually there's more headroom here. So I'd just love to hear your thoughts on, how much more there is to to gain from picking the low-hanging fruit, and what's the next step really from your perspective when that's been done. Thank you.
And I feel you looking at me. Were you looking at me? Okay. Lorenzo's last point is spot on. It's like, just because we've made progress, we actually have to put continued effort into continuing to maintain that progress. So for Google, we've reduced so we have this goal of 50% reduction by the end of 2025 per Googler. As of the end of 2023, we are at 38%. The 2024 numbers will be coming out this week in the Google Environmental Report. Maybe the press release went out already. I might have missed it. But that's great. Like, we've made great progress. And we have to continue doing everything we've been doing and more to hit the goal. And so, the work continues. And that's why I think baking it into the operational expectations of just how we function and how we operate as a business is critical. Because it's not like we get to the end of 2025 and then we go, oh, we did it, we're done, cool, move on. Nope, we could literally lose all of our progress within like a couple of weeks if we lose the practices and performance. So I don't know, I was going to come up with some analogy like the low-hanging fruit will continue to grow and rot if we don't do something about it. But and actually, Mike, since you're sitting here from the Guggenheimer team, I'm also thinking about another illustration of a really like good and practical example too is being mindful. This will resonate with you too. Being mindful of like what fruits and veggies are stored together to ensure that we're not accelerating the deterioration of certain fruits and veggies based upon their proximity to, like, I know at home bananas are my culprit. I try to keep them separate.
And having good refrigeration with different temperature settings so that the produce in a warehousing context, maybe more, is at the right temperature is also critical. And it is definitely not present in every DC in the US.
I agree with everything, and maybe like a slightly different twist on that is that each time you've accomplished something, there's the next thing that's the lowest hanging fruit there. Like you've picked your lowest hanging fruit, well then now what? Like the thing that was now a couple rungs up, now that's the lowest hanging fruit, right? So with this continuous improvement kind of mindset, there's always the next low hanging fruit. So that's, I think, there will always be something probably.
Very giveth.
I was just going to point out just size. Like in what I see, the bigger players have it pretty well nailed down. Though even there, you'll hear like, well, we have a lot of sites and some are better than others. But then if you go into a mid-size company or maybe a fast-growing startup that's just like exploding, then there's still low-hanging fruit for them to improve on.
I think that's really important. That I think a company the size of Google, can have corporate level goals and strategies and has the resources to work on that. But like the smaller, like especially when you get down to like the independently owned either restaurant or really small chain, it becomes harder, right? Because the one person is wearing many, many hats, right? So to get this on their attention, they need that help. That tends to be where our types of services are most helpful because they need some bandwidth to get over that hump. Something about that also reminded me, we were part of the Pacific Coast Collaborative project. We did projects both in Seattle and in Portland, and both were about materials that were already getting composted, but making them into product. And it was so cool to take ground beef that was going to compost, so like great, but they instead made like a taco mix out of it, and it was in their prepared foods, and then it was also in there to go. So it took something that they were paying to compost, and now they're getting a new revenue stream out of it, and it's getting eaten and not composted. So like there's always that like next opportunity. But I don't know if they would have thought of it if they weren't composting it, because then they were really seeing it. They had to touch it and separate it and put it over here. I was like, wait a minute, why are we doing that?
Hi, Claire Mifflin from the Center for Zero Waste Design. I have a small nonprofit, and we look at what design and architects and urban designers can do to help reduce waste. And I wondered if you could say what you think the role of design of facilities and what role that has to play.
I mean, I guess I see it from like an industrial engineering perspective. I don't know if that's quite what you're looking at, but just good warehouse design practices, like basic stuff. But in this research I've been doing recently, we talked to a couple distributors, and they were talking. Two of them were talking about moving from old mediocre buildings into new modern buildings, and how the refrigeration was so much better. And they had refrigerated docks, and then they had seals around the dock doors, so when the truck came up, no air, like hot air, got in. And just thinking through how the design could help the cold chain was like important to these distributors, and said it made a difference in the shelf life of the products.
I just think there's sort of like two broad general principles. One about design of our kitchen spaces, and are they organized in such a way that enables, for example, just the sort of easy trimming of vegetables and then shifting that trim into a compost bin. So there's all those little pieces of like how a kitchen flows, which I can't speak to as much as chefs like Mike T, who's in the room, and others know. And then we also think about design principles like in the front of house. So we focus a lot on just-in-time cooking, particularly for items like scrambled eggs. So producing scrambled eggs in like 15-minute increments is really important. It gives, again, better quality experience, reduces food waste because we're not inadvertently overproducing the amount of scrambled eggs. But we also need to have cooking spaces in the kitchens in front of house so that the chefs can literally be right there cooking the eggs and sort of turn around and serve them. So I think that thread of like, how does this space function for operators to enable the best performance is the thoughtfulness that we try to put into all of our spaces.
I totally agree with both of those answers, and then just take one more step of like the loading dock matters and the path from wherever the food is to the loading dock also really, really matters. That getting it to the right spot. In Massachusetts, this enforcement that I was talking about that happens, it's amazing how many violations are happening at locations that have recycling and composting set up, but it's hard to get it in the right spot, so it fails. So that like material flow, kind of thinking of it as an engineering or manufacturing, like getting it from here to here with the least touches, with the least variables is pretty important for it to actually work well.
We talk a lot about sort of minimizing friction wherever possible to drive the best performance, and then even on the flip side, adding friction. So those of you who did the tour of our Google office yesterday, you also saw in cases like our micro kitchens where we have like our sugary sweetened beverages behind frosted glass. So there's like a little bit more of a mental effort to just, you can grab the water or you can grab the sugary beverage. So in certain cases, add friction, other cases, remove friction, but both of those influence your behaviors.
Hey there, thank you all. My name is Matt Jones and I'm with Brightly, and we generate carbon credits from nonprofit food rescue and also consult with companies, food and beverage companies, on their food waste reduction journeys. And I would, sometimes we find it difficult to highlight the importance of food waste reduction because waste is often such a small part of a company's Scope 3 carbon footprint. So I'd love to hear what you highlight as the business cases for your clients or internally to help them prioritize food waste reduction within their supply chain or in their own operation. Thank you.
We're not driving it currently from a carbon reduction messaging standpoint. We're driving it more for an operational efficiency. But when we talk about at Google, we have our company-wide ambition around net zero by the end of 2030. So the framing of everything that we do within the food program ladders up to that. Candidly, our even bigger focus when it comes to our carbon reduction is things like our procurement practices and what we're menuing. And then we also mention food waste as part of that, but it's not the sort of driving message. It's more like, what are we buying, what are we menuing, and how are we reducing food waste? And those three pieces together connect our carbon story, if you will.
I'll say that when we're working with businesses, we're presenting the carbon every time. When we make our recommendations, if it's a donation, we're translating the potential, and certainly if they implement something, we're just using the US EPA WAR model to do the carbon calculations. So we're providing that information pretty universally, but also alongside the cost information that I was talking about, like trash mathing, so that we don't know what their motivation is, so let's give them both most likely motivators to have them choose, if that helps.
Is it? I wasn't sure. Ashley Baker with Waste Not Consulting. We do business engagement for recycling and food waste programs for commercial properties. And we're down in Southern California, so we deal with a lot of the regulations and everything too. And I wanted to ask, what underutilized practice or technology could revolutionize how businesses prevent food from going to waste that you guys are able to talk about, or maybe you've put forward with some of the work that you do?
That's a big question. What underutilized technology could revolutionize food waste reduction?
One thing we learned about Google was you guys use LeanPath,
Yeah.
and that's not used everywhere. It's a fairly expensive technology. So did you maybe look at other technologies like LeanPath before you chose LeanPath to look at your food waste and donation programs?
So there are a variety of solution providers in the space for food waste tracking. I think there's a return on investment when it comes to the amount of food waste that's avoided. So we don't necessarily consider our investment in LeanPath to be a added cost per se. I'm not sure. Hopefully you didn't get that on the tour yesterday, because I didn't hear that on my portion of the tour. So yeah, I think any type of technology that you're using, there's going to be some type of financial investment, and then there has to be some type of return on it. So we've even done other things with, so using LeanPath as an example, we've, in the case of our Guggenheimer vendor partner, connected their menu management system, Crunch Time, and that menu data is going into LeanPath so that our teams who are using the LeanPath tool can quickly connect and identify if something's like chicken parmesan rather than just chicken. And then we've seen even higher amounts of waste reduction with the connection to menu insights. So I think leveraging the technology that you have and making it work for you even better drives even greater performance and return on investment.
Yeah, I would echo what Kathy just said about taking the software you have and making it more effective for food waste. So in a warehouse context, one thing that comes to mind, for example, is you have a warehouse management system. If you implement that well, then you can do things like govern the logic about what inventory is allocated to which order, based not just on first in, first out, or first expiring, first out, but what are the shelf life expectations of your customers, and different customers have different shelf life expectations, and how do you best allocate the pallets that you have? Something like that, or implementing the WMS with really good codes when you have to take things out of inventory, saying why you took it out, and then you can use that data to understand where the loss is happening. And those are like tweaks to the implementation that would make it more effective for reducing food waste. So that's what I would, I guess, emphasize with my for-profit clients.
I think both of those are good examples that, like, it's sort of sector specific within the food business, right? That the answer to that for restaurants is not the answer to that necessarily for supermarkets, is not for distribution, for food manufacturing. So it really kind of depends on which sector. And I also think there is no one silver bullet. I think it was Dana saying earlier, like, we need all of the, there's so many innovators here, each kind of focusing on a very important niche, because there isn't just one thing, or hopefully we would all have been doing it already. So, like, that I think that there's, you got to look a little more, we try to look a little more granularly, I should say, at what the sector is, what's happening at this site, so that we can pull the right levers.
Amazing. All right, we are just on time. Sorry to everyone who didn't get their questions answered. You've been an amazing audience. Thank you to our incredible panelists. Just wanted to remind everyone, lunch is available on the 3rd floor. The breakout sessions will start back up at 1:30. There's also a bunch of booths and interactive activities on the 3rd floor, maybe the 5th floor. And thank you for coming. This is great.